Okay, I think I've done a YouTuber's most important job, which is remembering to hit record. Hey, if you can't make fun of yourself, who can you make fun of? What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at NerdTees, and welcome to week number 9 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2019 CFL season. We're just 1 week away from double digits. These CFL seasons grow up so fast. So apparently failing to hit record on my camera slash phone slash thing that I use to record my videos was just a harbinger of things to come last week. Karma was trying to save me from the poor results that I wound up with in week 8. I was only 1-3 straight up, and you know when you're not hitting the game straight up, it's going to be real tough sledding for the rest of the picks. Did break even against the spread at 2-2, but whiffed completely on the over-unders 0-4. This was by far our worst week of the season. So, I mean, if this is rock bottom, we only got one place to go from here. So hopefully we can turn this bad boy around. Only 3-9 last week, 55-38 on the season. We're now just under that 60% clip, which is what I'm going for on my overall picks this season, only 59.14%. We're 20-11 straight up. We're 19-12 against the spread, and just one above 500 at 16-15. In the CFL standings, all of a sudden we have a dogfight for the lead in the West Division. Who could have predicted that one? Calgary has come back and caught up to Winnipeg on the heels of back-to-back Blue Bombers losses. Both of those teams sitting at 5-2. We're going to give Calgary the edge here for being undefeated 3-0 within the West Division. In the East, Hamilton is still out front at 5-2. Montreal still right on their heels there. They're even money at 3-3. Be interesting to see what happens with Montreal's quarterback situation. In the official Atlantic Schooners CFL Fantasy Football League, had another good week last week, because, you know, one of the only things that went good for me last week. I've pulled myself back up inside the top 15 overall in that league, sitting at 14th out of the 65 people in that league. Had 99.3 points in week 8, so falling just shy of that 100-point plateau. Would have been 100 points for a second week in a row. 707.7 points overall on the season, and all those sevens got to be something lucky. My week 8 MVP, no question in my mind, Andrew Harris, 15 carries, $152, 2 touchdowns in what was ultimately that losing effort against Toronto, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Also added 45 receiving yards on 6 catches, 37.7 fantasy points for me last week. He definitely set the pace. Week 9 CFL fantasy lineup. Right in front of your faces right now, we are going hard on the Saskatchewan Roughriders pass game, and that is because Montreal is ranked as the worst pass defense in the CFL, despite the fact that they've done some good things on defense this season. And we went with Cody Fajardo over Trevor Harris, and I really heavily considered Trevor Harris in this spot too, because that Red Blacks defense, that a little stinky, but I mean, Fajardo costs $3,000 less. So playing Fajardo instead of Harris allowed me to play the Hamilton Ticats defense. You're going to notice the running backs look not very good. Crockett, as well as Christian Jones, who just got traded in exchange for Kenny Stafford. So, you know, there were just not great matchups for the high-end running backs. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to spend my money in the pass game. I'm not going to worry about the running backs. I got somebody that should get good volume in Crockett, and Christian Jones will hopefully be involved early and often in the return game. So, you know what? We had to go that way. That's the CFL fantasy lineup for week 9. Our CFL game lineup looks a little something like this. You got the Calgary Stampeders traveling to Winnipeg to take on the Blue Bombers, now suddenly losers of 2 games in a row. You've got Saski traveling to Montreal to take on the Alouettes, with an interesting quarterback situation there in Montreal. You've got Ottawa traveling to Edmonton to take on the Eskimos, which I think is probably one of the more lopsided matchups of the week. And speaking of lopsided matchups, the BC Lions traveling to Hamilton to take on the Ticats, the Argos fresh off their first win of the season on the bye this week. So let's start with that best in the West matchup of Calgary and Winnipeg. Both of these teams 5-2, but going in very much opposite directions. Calgary, winners of 3 straight games. Winnipeg has lost back-to-back matchups. Now, in saying Calgary's won 3 straight games, they haven't exactly been pretty wins, but all of them count. Calgary coming off of a 6-point victory against Edmonton last week, 24-18, and the defense really bent in that one. 401 total yards allowed to the Eskimos, the vast majority of that coming with the arm of Trevor Harris, and the offense really underperformed in that game. It was not a good game for Arbuckle, not a good game for the run game. Terry Williams was the real difference maker, the real game breaker in this matchup for the Stampeders, and it was mostly in the return game. 241 total return yards in this game, and that is what Calgary won the game on. They won the game on field position. They got set up in advantageous situations to put points on the board. I think Paradis had 4 field goals in that game. My question is, can the Calgary Stampeders continue to have virtually no run game to speak of and keep winning? It's them and Toronto, the bottom 2 in the league, in terms of total run offense. Toronto's not really worried about winning football games, although they did win last week. Calgary's very much concerned with winning football games, making the playoffs, and winning the Grey Cup. Can they do that if they don't really have a run game? The not too distant future, Don Jackson will be back, and Kadeem Carey eventually will be back. So I think the run game will come along, but until that time comes, Calgary's got to focus on finding a way to run the football. The Blue Bombers are coming off of an inexplicable 1-point loss in Toronto against the Argos, and this game should have been fait accompli. They were up 20-0, a little bit before halftime, gave up some points. I think it was 20-10 at the half, a 10-point lead, and it winds up being a rather embarrassing loss that I hang mostly on the defense. The defense really loosened up in the second half. It spoiled that 20-0 lead, spoiled the 10-point halftime lead, and spoiled Andrew Harris's excellent game. Like we talked about, 21 total touches for Harris, 197 all-purpose yards, and 2 touchdowns in that game. That spoils that game for Andrew Harris. And you saw him after the game just walking off the field shaking his head like, what else am I supposed to do? The Bombers did good things in that game, especially on the offensive side. You had the game of Andrew Harris. Matt Nichols spread the ball really well in that game. He was like 67%, had 5 receivers that had at least 3 catches in that game. He moved the ball really well. Didn't quite have the finish that I would like to see him have. Didn't really have a ton of yardage either, but the finish is what's really there, especially against a team like Toronto. That is what you need to do, and the defense needs to figure it out. They need to figure out if they are that defense from the early part of the season when the team was 5-0, or if they're this. I have no doubt in my mind that as it sits right now, on paper, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are the better football team. I have no doubt in my mind about that. What I do have doubts about is whether or not that better football team actually shows up. Plus, you have kind of the specter of Bo Levi Mitchell. They're talking about him maybe returning this week. If it was me, I probably wouldn't put him out there quite yet. I might look at next week or the next game, whatever it happens to be. I am full on hedging my bets in this football game. I'm going to take Winnipeg to win the game. I like Winnipeg to win the football game, but I'm going to hedge my bets here, and I'm going to take Calgary plus the 8 points that Winnipeg is favored in this one. More than a touchdown against a really good Stamps defense and a team that has just found ways to win in the last few weeks, while Winnipeg's kind of found ways to lose. Total in the game set at 48.5 points, which is pretty well another perfect Winnipeg Blue Bombers total. It's just the Bombers, for whatever reason, Vegas is really hitting these numbers as far as I'm concerned. I look at these numbers, I cap the game, and then I look at what the number is, and I'm like, damn it, they got me again. Offenses that obviously can score, more than capable of scoring points, but this feels like 2 elite defenses to me, and I think when you got 2 elite defenses that are going to step up and play each other, and especially when the winner of the game is going to then lead the division, I think I got to skew on fewer points, tighter game, like something like the Hamilton-Winnipeg game from a couple weeks ago, which I think was 23-15, something like that. I wouldn't be shocked at all to see a score like that in this game. So we're going to skew under on the 48.5 point total. Let's go to Montreal now, where the Alouettes are going to welcome in the red-hot Saskatchewan Roughriders, winners of 3 straight games after their 1-3 start. Saski picking up a 24-19 win against Hamilton last week. That's a really good win for the Riders on home field. They score 11 points in the fourth quarter. Kind of steal a win there. Like Cody Fajardo has a rush touchdown inside of the last minute to give them the lead for good. I shouldn't say steal, but I mean, like, you know, Hamilton's a really good football team, and that was right down at the wire, but they just snatched that win away from them, and that's the kind of game that Saski's got to win. Both Cody Fajardo and William Powell rush for 50 yards or more and a rushing touchdown, so it's good that you got your running back going, good that you got your quarterback going, especially now where he's the undisputed number one. And Shaq Evans absolutely feasting on the Ticats secondary. 7 catches for $160 through the air. Big game for Fajardo, big game for Shaq Evans. Also worth noting, the Riders were kind of active in the trade market this week. They acquire not only a 4th round pick, but they also acquire Kenny Stafford from the Edmonton Eskimos to help that pass game. They trade out Zach Collaros, he goes to Toronto, and Christian Jones goes to Edmonton, as you noticed in my fantasy lineup. So they're making some changes here. Saski trying to make themselves a better football team, a more dangerous football team on the offensive side. The Montreal Alouettes enter this game off of a 30-27 loss in overtime against the Ottawa REDBLACKS. And I think this was really a slight case of letting this game slip away. I feel like the Alouettes should have won this football game. They certainly didn't lose to the better football team. It was the quarterback play. It was the quarterback play that let the Alouettes down in this one. Vernon Adams was just 13 for 25, so just barely over 50% for only 120 passing yards, no touchdowns, 1 pick. Now, Adams did have 2 rushing touchdowns, so he was putting points on the board. Takes a hit to the head. He is out. Looks like Pipkin is going to start this game. We're back to Antonio Pipkin, but I mean, Pipkin did not look good in relief of Adams last week. So my concerns about his abilities in this game are certainly very high. But despite that, I felt like the Owls did almost everything right in that football game. They just didn't come away with the win. But again, the pass game is going to be the single biggest question mark of really the rest of the Alouettes season if Vernon Adams is going to be out long term. If certain conditions had been met, I might actually look at the Alouettes to win this game. If Vernon Adams was in, if they had held on to win last week, if Antonio Pipkin had looked even decent to me last week, if any of those conditions hit, I might be like, you know what? I'm going to take the Alouettes in the upset here. But none of them hit. Pipkin's in. He didn't look good. They lost the game last week. We're going to take Saski in this one. I've got the Riders on the road in Montreal, hanging a loss on the Alouettes. On the line, the Alouettes are 2.5-point dogs at home, which is right around that spread area where you're looking like, maybe I do want to take the Owls in the upset because these like small dogs at home tend to do very well. But it's only 2.5 points. It's not that much to give up for the team that I think is the better team and is going to play better. So we're going to take Saski minus the 2.5 points. I'm actually a little surprised this line is not larger. Total in the game set at 50.5 points, and this is actually the total this week that I feel the most confident about, because I capped this thing at a mid to high 50, 55, 56, maybe even up to 57. So the fact that we're getting 50.5, hammer that bad boy on the over. We really like the over here, over on 50.5 points. Before we move on, I'm going to take the opportunity, as always, to pump the tires of my incredible friends and sponsors at NerdTees, nerdtees.ca. Hit that promo code BWFinest. Going to save you 15% at checkout. Free shipping on any order in Canada over $75. If you're in the US, 2 clicks of a button, everything is in US prices for you. You get an excellent conversion. Today's blend is my personal favorite blend, Watermelon Oolong. These nice little curled up oolong leaves, smells and tastes just like watermelon, which is tremendous. It's great cold, it's great hot, it's just great all around. nerdtees.ca, hit that promo code BWFinest, save that money, find yourself something to love, or find someone you love something to love. You can do it on nerdtees.ca. And now the lopsided matchups. We're going to go to Edmonton now, where the Eskimos are returning home, losers last week, to face the victorious from last week, Ottawa REDBLACKS. Ottawa 3-4 on the season. Again, they picked up that 30-27 overtime win last week in Montreal. They overcame deficits of 10-0 and 17-8 in that football game. They also force a William Stanback fumble in overtime. Stanback actually left this game with an injury. Questionable whether Stanback plays for Montreal next week, but they force a Stanback fumble in overtime, recover the fumble after having kicked a field goal. Ball game over. Dominique Davis returned under center for the REDBLACKS and looked shaky. We'll call it shaky. He threw for under 60%, only 164 yards. He did throw a touchdown, but he did throw 2 interceptions. It was really the Devontae Dedmon show, and that was the reason why Ottawa won this football game. In the return game, 12 total kick returns or punt returns combined, 376 return yards. Also had 2 touchdowns in the return game. That was the difference. Montreal wins this game in a walk had Devontae Dedmon not gone completely Pinball Clemens times Brandon Banks times 12. In all fairness to the team that won the football game, they shouldn't have been the team that won the football game. The REDBLACKS had fewer total yards. They had less time of possession. They had more turnovers. They had more penalties than the Montreal Alouettes, and imagine the territory that covers. Ottawa shouldn't have won this game, but they did. They can take momentum from that, hopefully not repeat that performance. The Eskimos dropping that aforementioned 6-point loss in Calgary last week, and it's tough to score, 0 points in the first half of a football game and try to beat a great team like Calgary, and yet at the end of the game, they had a shot. They could have done it. Another huge game from Trevor Harris. He threw for 69% completions on his passes, 373 passing yards, found the end zone twice, but got absolutely nothing on the ground from the returning CJ Gable. 8 carries for just 27 yards, so what is that, not quite 3.5 yards a carry, and only 17 yards on 5 catches. So they needed more from Gable. Sure, he was back, maybe they're trying to ease him in a little bit. And again, it was another instance of the better performing team in terms of yardage, time of possession, the pass game, things like that. The better performing team winding up on the wrong end of things. And Edmonton has been on the wrong end of that now in at least 2 of their losses, if not all 3 of them. It's got to be frustrating for the Eskimos to play like the better football team and not come away with the win. I do expect Dominique Davis to be better in this football game now that he's got that first game kind of under his belt, but I also expect the Eskimos to be pissed. I expect the Eskimos to be very much not happy and to very much take it out on a very bad Ottawa REDBLACKS defense. So that's just kind of the way I think the football game's going to go. Obviously, we are on the Edmonton Eskimos in this one. We're going to take Edmonton in a good spot at home to hang another loss on the REDBLACKS. On the line, Edmonton, an 8.5-point favorite at home. This is kind of a coin flip because it's more than a touchdown, more than a fully converted touchdown. And so there's always kind of a question mark about it, but we're going to hammer them minus the 8.5 with the caveat being this is a bit of a coin flip. I'm not going to argue with you too much. Total in the game set at 47.5 points. I think this is another perfect total. Like I could very easily see this game being, 27-17, 27-18, something like that, which puts you right around that total. But I think I'm still going to skew on the under here. I need to see more from Dominique Davis to think that they're going to score a lot of points on the Eskimos. So we're going to skew on the under here because unless Edmonton absolutely blows them out and hangs up 40 on their own, I think this number stays under. And the last game we're going to look at sees the BC Lions traveling to Hamilton to take on the Ticats. Both of these teams on the losing end of things last time out. Now, of course, 2 of those 3 straight losses have come at the hands of the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and that was the case last time out. BC dropping a 45-18 decision at home against Saski. That was back in week 7. BC, the bye week, finally mercifully coming for basically a hapless Lions team. In that Lions loss, the 45-18 loss, everyone was bad. Mike Riley was bad. Brendan Rutley was bad. Everybody was bad with the exception of Ryan Langford, who now looks like he's the primary return man in BC, with the exception of Ryan Langford. 2 special teams touchdowns. He had a 118-yard missed field goal return for a touchdown and an 89-yard kick return touchdown. He was the only Lions player that showed up. Although you could say one other Lions player that did show up in this game was Danny O'Brien, but that's a bad thing. 28-year-old quarterback Danny O'Brien coming from Catawba, am I saying that right? Catawba. Anyways, he's 28 years old. He actually relieved Mike Riley in this game for a few snaps, and is the clock ticking on the health of Mike Riley. If he needs to start taking breaks in games, hopefully the bye week did good things for him, because that's a beaten up quarterback right there. The 5-2 Ticats dropping that aforementioned 24-19 loss in Saskatchewan last week. It wasn't really for a lack of effort. Like the effort was definitely there for the Ticats, and they were in position where they could have made a play to win that game. It wasn't a lack of effort, it was lack of talent. You didn't have Jeremiah Masoli. You didn't have Brandon Banks. You still don't have Sean Thomas Erlington, and you don't have him for a while yet. It was just the absence of that high-end talent on the offensive side of the ball. Dane Evans played okay at the quarterback position, 19 of 29, only 196 yards, a touchdown, and interception, added 35 yards on 4 carries, which actually made him the Ticats' leading rusher, which is... that's not good. He could have used Brandon Banks, right? Like, he just could have used his biggest playmaker and arguably the biggest playmaker in the CFL. The Ticats defense got ground down in this football game by an elite run game. Saski running the ball 28 times for 120 total yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. But when you run the ball 28 times, the defense just wears out. If you've ever played Madden, you get that line from the commentators. Pounding the football, run the ball, win the time of possession battle. That could be the formula against a good Ticats team. Luckily, that's all the Ticats have to be in this game to win it, is good. They certainly don't have to be great to beat the BC Lions. And if Brandon Banks plays, which he's looking explosive in practices, if he plays, it's Ticats in a walk. We're going to take Hamilton in this one. Let's take the Ticats at home to beat the Lions. On the line, Hamilton favored by 10.5 points at home. It is double digits, which I do get a little bit nervous about. But again, I think Brandon Banks plays. And if Brandon Banks plays, Hamilton should cover this number. I feel pretty good about it. Anything under 2 touchdowns. Total here is set at 51.5. And it's another total I feel pretty good about. I like the over in this one. I've got it capped right around where I had Saski and Montreal. Like a mid 50, a 54 to 55. So I feel good about this going over by at least a field goal. Let's take over 51.5 in Hamilton, BC. There you have it, folks. Those are my Week 9 picks in the 2019 CFL season. We will go over them here with you one more time. I've got Winnipeg at home beating Calgary in that battle for number 1 in the West Division, but we're hedging our bets and taking Calgary +8 against the spread in a game that stays under the 48.5 point total. The only road team we have winning this week, we got the Saskatchewan Roughriders going into Montreal and beating Antonio Pipkin and the Alouettes. We're hammering Saskatchewan -2.5 against the spread in a game that goes over the 50.5 point total, I think fairly comfortably. We got the Edmonton Eskimos at home beating the Ottawa REDBLACKS, and we're hammering Edmonton -8.5 against the spread. Can't argue with you if you want to go either way there. In a game that stays under the 47.5 point total. And we got the Hamilton Tiger Cats at home hanging a loss on the BC Lions. We're hammering Hamilton. We're hammering Hammer -10.5 points. And we're going to have the game go over the 51.5 point total. Before we close off here, I just wanted to kind of address something that was in the comments section of last week's video. I had somebody, I think it was Mr. Marciopoulos, I can never remember how to, I'm sure I put a ton of extra letters in there, asked me how I felt about the Zach Collaros trade specifically. The trade being Zach Collaros going to Toronto in exchange for a 4th round pick, and I think it might even be like a conditional 4th round pick. So Fajardo's the new undisputed starting number 1 quarterback in Saski. They've got a good backup there in Isaac Harker if anything should happen. It made Zach Collaros expendable. And with his injury history, it was a good move for Saskatchewan to get something for him. But from Toronto's standpoint, they need a starting quarterback. MBT is not reliable, and Zach Collaros, I would call certainly more reliable when he's on the field than MBT is. So I think it's a good trade both ways. I kind of like it a little bit more for Toronto, even though I don't think the Argos are exactly going anywhere, but I think it's a good trade on both sides. But what do you guys think? All right, folks, the Week 9 episode is now in the books. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at NerdTees. Enjoy the games in Week 9. We got Week 10 coming up next, and man, NFL training camps are back in. The most exciting time of the year for this guy specifically, because there's just so damn much to talk about. So we'll see you again next week.